A recent study on health of mule deer raised eyebrows, and it was all because of a unique process on the land. We will discover it all on the next county seat. Stay tuned. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm Chad Booth. Been a while since we've had a chat. We've got a very interesting topic today and a very pleasant guest who's extremely well educated on the topics. We are going to introduce you to Randy Larson, who is a professor in charge of wildlife.
Yeah, I'm a wildlife biologist in the Department of Plant and Wildlife Sciences at Brigham Young University.
Brigham Young. Thank you very much. I get those titles kind of buggered up.
No worries.
Anyway, we are talking about a recent study that he's been doing that, and I would really like to understand it a little bit better. You are basically, over multiple years, tracking deer migration by technology and seeing what factors contribute to the health of the population.
Yeah, sure. We're fortunate in this state. The State Division of Wildlife Resources has a very aggressive, long-term monitoring program for mule deer. So we work really closely with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. This monitoring and research, it's expensive and it's funded by a whole bunch of groups, including Mule Deer Foundation, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, State of Utah, etc., and the university. And we, for more than a decade now, have been using the latest and greatest tracking technology, GPS collars and more, to monitor mule deer in Utah, understand what their migration routes are, what the important habitats that they are using, where those are located, what kills them, what their survival rates are like, and all that kind of stuff.
It's kind of fun to actually look at, at your reports, because you'll see these little tracks and you'll see them moving down the Tavaputs and across the highway, and then they'll go, oh, they went clear over to Moab, and then and you just don't think of deer migrating quite that much.
I had a friend once say it was like Facebook for mule deer, where you could see what they were doing. But there's a lot to learn, and a lot of times there are things that you might think you know, but you either confirm that or you're often surprised by what they actually do relative to what you thought they might be doing in a particular area.
So is this study a multi-species study, or has it just mostly been focused on mule deer?
Certainly it's mule deer are a priority in this state, but there are other species involved. We've got GPS collars on elk and pronghorn, mountain lions, black bears, all the way down to, we've got students right now that are catching chukar partridge and putting a little tracker and transmitter on those birds. So it's more than just mule deer, but mule deer are the number one priority at the moment.
So do you collar them when they're fawns?
And I'll walk you through that a little bit.
Yeah, because they're going to need to change your clothes at some point. Right?
Yeah, and I'll show you how that works. The basic approach is to catch them with a helicopter in the month of December. Mm-hmm. So the state of Utah contracts with a private capture company. They're here with usually 2 helicopters for most of the month, traveling around the state, catching an adequate number per herd unit to make sure we can have our finger on the pulse of what's happening for every herd unit that we're monitoring. They're then fitted with a GPS collar, like this one here. I brought some show and tell stuff for us. Mm-hmm. So that GPS collar would have a little more than 4 years of battery life. It would collect the location every 2 hours. Mm-hmm. 12 locations a day, and then it will send those through the satellite network once a day. And so that would be the basic collar that would go on an adult female, and we could then track those animals through the next 4.5 years.
Do you ever worry that if you collar them in December and they're young, that the collar will get too tight?
Yeah, definitely something to be concerned about. There are options. You can fit them. Obviously, they've got these holes so you can adjust, and we take great care in making sure we fit them the right way. For the younger ones that are really growing a lot, there are options with expansion or elastic that would allow those to stretch.
Do you ever lose a collar?
Sometimes, yeah. They'll sometimes slip them off, but that's relatively rare.
Wow. What do you extrapolate from the information?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're looking at movement.
Yes.
What else does it give you as an opportunity? I mean, when we were talking on the phone, you had a crew out because a collar had stopped moving.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah, so there's two basic pieces of information that we are collecting that are really important to understanding what's going on. There is the movement piece and the habitat use. That's important. But we're also trying to get a sense of how healthy they are. So right here is an ultrasound, a portable ultrasound, that we will use in December when we catch them. We'll bring them back to kind of the staging area, almost like a deer mash unit where people are drawing blood, putting the collar on, measuring fat, and we can measure rump fat and use that ultrasound for other things as well, which gives you a real insight and into how healthy they are. If they're skinny or fat, that speaks a lot to the habitat condition and quality, and it also impacts their vulnerability to predation over that next year, whether they're going to make it through the winter or starve to death, etc. So we're coupling the ultrasound and body fat data with what you talked about with these students. The collar has a bearing in it, and if it doesn't move for 6 hours, this will send an email saying, hey, we've got a situation or there's a mortality warning. And then we as a state, huge effort, involves a lot of students, involves a lot of biologists with Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, will scramble and go do a formal investigation anytime there's a warning of a dead animal. If you get there quick enough, you can figure out what happened. Did it starve to death? Was it a mountain lion? Did it get hit by a car? You can get a sense of that. And so then for the whole state, you can look around and say, okay, this particular herd unit has skinny deer where many of them are not surviving the winter. This one's got healthy deer, but there's high predation. And you can just start to understand what the limiting factors might be around the state, and they vary. Even side-by-side management units can have very different pressures and influences. But those two pieces of information have been game changers in terms of managing these species.
Well, I can see in managing the species that looking at the habitat and the fat and how much fuel they've got to make it through winter. What can you do when you're looking at controlling an environment to deal with predation? Do you up the hunt count? I mean, how do you manage that to protect the dirt? Because we're doing a big juggling act on all of this.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors at play, and these data and information give you a sense of what might be the most important factor at the moment, and then you can respond accordingly. And so, for example, there's one particular herd unit in southern Utah, the Boulder unit, where the mule deer are consistently really skinny. And they're really skinny in December when we catch them, which suggests during that summer, they didn't have enough food or not enough calories to put on fat. And so that's a different scenario there. Even though there is predation happening, the animals are not healthy and they're skinny. And so that's something to think about and note, and it's maybe a more longer term fix. We've got to get in and do some habitat work. The boulder in particular hasn't had a lot of disturbance or fire. Mule deer are a species that responds pretty well, especially to high elevation fires that reset the plant community to forbs and younger shrubs and trees. And so that would be a scenario, and that this information is now working its way through land use planning decisions, state of Utah's pushing for habitat treatment work. And then here on this another adjacent unit, you might have fat deer, but they're subject to lots of mountain lion predation. And so that would be like a different scenario where the solution would be remove mountain lions, relax that predation pressure, and then the herd will grow. Whereas if they're skinny and not healthy, we've got to solve that nutritional problem.
Are you ever frustrated when you hear hunters complain, the DWR is doing a lousy job and blah, 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 and they have too many hunters or we can't get permits and it's just like you got all these pieces you're juggling, and then you've got the hunters that only see it from their scope, I guess.
Sure, yeah. I don't get frustrated. I am a hunter myself, so I get it. That's what got me into this field. And you appreciate the passion. I mean, I would way rather interact with people who care a lot and are passionate about mule deer and hunting than people who are apathetic and don't care. So I don't think we need to get frustrated. What this information and these data They're widely shared. It gives people a chance, the hunters included, to understand what's going on and to have sort of more informed decisions and to take that energy and passion and maybe channel it to the thing that's going to help the most for a particular area.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what's it like out in the field? I mean, you obviously go out and do some of this.
Every chance I get, it's amazing. We're gone as a captured group and team. We're gone for most of the month of December, and that's a lot of fun. It's always interesting.
Cold though, right?
It's cold.
When you're at 10,000 feet, because well, of course they probably moved down off the high range at that point. Right?
Yeah, they're usually down a little lower, but it is cold. That actually helps in a lot of ways. The helicopters work better. They have more lift at colder temperatures. The animals are obviously getting stressed out because we're catching them, and so you can manage their temperatures a little better if it's cold and snowy, or there's snow on the ground for them. So yeah, it's cold, but you just make do. You dress up and bundle up, and it's not too bad.
Well, I'm not complaining about being outdoors in the winter.
Right.
You know.
So December is really busy, and then the other thing that's happened in the last decade or so is the technology's improved. Is you can use the ultrasound to check pregnancy. And so a lot of times if we want to track pregnancy, production, birth weights of fawns, twinning rates, then we'll come back in March and we'll recatch a sample of deer on certain units, and we will then
you track them by the collar at that point.
Yeah, or
right?
you can catch uncollared ones as well, but then we will put in a device like this. This is called what's referred to as a VIT, stands for vaginal implant transmitter. It has a light and a temperature sensor on it. And it's not exactly Bluetooth technology, but it talks to this collar here that the mom's wearing on her neck. And it goes in the vagina, and then it will come out in June when the fetus is born. It will see the light, it will cool down from body temperature, and it will send a warning message that says, hey, birth triggered. We know where mom's at. We can find this with telemetry. And if you get there within a day, there'll be a fawn or twin fawns really, really close to this. And then you can catch those and put on a little
fawn collar.
Yeah, a little fawn collar, neonate collar. And this one's got stitching that will pop as they grow. And then eventually you'll see there, once that stitch pops, it'll just fall off. But that gives you the ability to track them from 0 days to 6 months of age.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Yeah. That is very fascinating how they thought this through. So that covers that fast growth issue.
Yeah, and then we'll go back in December. So most of Utah's mule deer are born in June. We'll go back in December, use telemetry in the helicopter to find the ones that are still alive, and then we'll put a collar like this on that will let them grow from 6 months to adult.
Okay, so how long does it take from birth of a fawn till they hit, growth maturity at least?
That's a great question. They're still growing a lot by the time we're catching them in December when they're 6 months of age.
Yeah.
And 6 months of age, a really big one might be 80 pounds. By the time we're catching them as adults when they're 2, you might be more like 150, 160 pounds. So they're only half size that 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Let's take a quick break, and we will come back to the county seat. We want to delve into some of the unique natures of this recent study. The one I mentioned was raising eyebrows. Stay with us on the county seat. Welcome back to County Seat. We are talking to Randy Larson, who is a wildlife biologist out of BYU and has been studying deer population, migration, and health, and has made a good career out of something fun.
It's been great, yeah. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of great people to work with, the state agency and the nonprofit groups that support it. So it's great.
So you probably couldn't do this without the help of the nonprofits, right? Because they raise a lot of money.
Yeah, of course. It's really expensive. Helicopter time is expensive. These collars are expensive, and so it's a very much a collaborative effort. The biggest and best one I know of in all of North America. And it wouldn't happen without the state agency, Division of Wildlife Resources, some of the federal agencies that partner, BLM, Forest Service, and then of course, the Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, Mule Deer Foundation that help raise the money that does all this.
It's I guess they have a motivation in it because a healthy deer population leads to more permits.
Sure, and they care. They're passionate. They care about Utah's wildlife.
Yeah.
And want to see healthy herds.
So let's. I want to talk about the scope of this. We have 35 management units across the state. How many have you covered, and what does it take to get a good feel for what's happening?
Yeah, great question. The state is divided into about 35 different mule deer management units. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources started monitoring them with collars all the way back in 2009. But the GPS technology was really expensive back then and not as good. It really kicked off big time with GPS technology in 2014. And it's sort of grown. Initially, it was 7 of the 35 units that were chosen as kind of representative units to get a sense of what's happening around the state. It's expensive. The collars are a couple $1,000s each. The helicopter time's expensive, and it takes a lot of time. And so it started out, at a more modest pace with 7. We typically target sample sizes of about 40 adult females and then 20 or so 6-month-olds, making sure we have that level of sample every year to track survival and health. And so, you can do some of that math. It adds up quick. Since that initial effort 10 years ago, it's grown, and we've spread and covered additional units, and we're somewhere around 20, 22 of the 35 management units.
So you have a majority of them under
and
monitor.
Closing in on getting all of them. We'll eventually get all of them.
Wow.
And they're not all monitored, continuously, but we're able to get in and sample and identify what limiting factors might be and provide that data back to the land managers in the state.
So I teach people with a little bit of information that surprised even me, who's only at arm length distance, curious about all this stuff. And that was what's happening up at Range Valley, or the Range Creek area, just outside of Price. Fill me in a little bit on what you discovered and what happened up there.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a backdrop, a lot of these data from the last decade have changed how we think about mule deer over the course of the year. Certainly the winter is a period when mortality rates are higher. Animals are dying. And for a lot of years, because they're dying on winter range, the thought process has been, we need to try and work to improve winter range and maybe give them a better chance to make it through the winter. But all this research from the last decade has actually pointed us a little bit differently towards summer range, and that how well they survive the winter is a function of winter range, yes, but maybe more importantly, of how much fat they come into the winter with. And that's been almost a paradigm shift that's occurred in the last decade with this broader monitoring. And so then, with that paradigm shift, we've started to look around and see, okay, well, where are places that are doing active management to try and improve the quality of summer range? And the 106 restoration effort on the 9-mile Range Creek unit is one example. And so it's been interesting to then move into that unit and try and really understand the effect of those habitat treatments on mule deer.
Okay, so when you look at summer range management, because it's high altitude, it's not a matter of chaining down pinions and reseeding like you would in some of the lower units, although that does do a lot of good. It produces water, produces growth, it improves the view shed. I mean, there are a million reasons to be in favor of it.
And it's been shown that can help mule deer as well.
Right.
So it's not like it's one or the other. They all contribute, but some of the research suggests summer might have as much or more of an influence as winter range treatments.
And I can understand where that is a real shift in thinking.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the 2x4 to the side of the head. We should have thought of this. But, the question is, of those summer units that you're looking at, you say you're looking for active management. Have you compared active management styles? Because 106 is a very unique, mechanical only, very precise treatment system. Controlled burns are less precise.
Right.
How do they stack up with each other?
Yeah, we're working towards that. Haven't towards that kind of comparison. What we've been doing the last year and a half on the 9 Mile Range Creek is looking at, okay, what are deer doing? How fat are they? What are the weights of their fawns? How many are having twins when they're using the 106 habitat restoration treatments compared to like a control area where it's similar habitat but not actively managed like it is at 106. And so that's been the focus of the last year and a half. And the results are pretty promising. We've got really fat deer, especially for their latitude, coming out of those treatments. And that body fat is like the one thing that, the rising tide lifts all boats. That the amount of body fat these animals have influences everything. Their own survival, the twinning rate, how heavy their fawns are, how much milk they have to help those fawns grow big from 0 to 6 months of age. So how the growth rate of the fawns, how heavy those fawns are at 6 months of age, which is critical to getting them through their first winter. And so anyways, the data, it's still preliminary. We're just a year and a half into trying to understand it, but so far it looks like really fat deer with big fawns coming out of those 106 habitat restoration treatments.
Interesting. Do you think some of it has to do with the speed at which the landscape rehabilitates? Because on a fire, it takes a while for everything to degrade enough to get stuff to come back up. And 106 has been really remarkable to watch because you'll see aspen, which I understand the leaves are very tasty to deer, and it'll come back almost immediately, right?
Yeah, so the treatments come back well, and it puts, I think the biggest thing that it does is it makes areas that weren't very good for forage, low forage availability. Aspen trees are tall, the leaves are out of reach, and it takes that and puts all that nutrition into plants that are now accessible and that animals can eat from them, whereas before they were less available. It drastically shifts and changes what we call the nutritional landscape.
So from an aesthetic point, I get that. From an aesthetic standpoint, you obviously have been, in controlled burn areas and untreated areas. You've been in 106. You've been in all different kinds of landscapes. Does it look like a healthy forest? Do you think that's what a forest should look like when they get done with those treatments?
Yeah, I mean, it looks fine to me. It looks good. What we don't want to see conifer pine trees encroaching and excluding aspen. The aspen are tough to get back, and they have this co-evolved relationship with conifer. They need disturbance of one kind or another. Historically and traditionally, that's been fire, where fire would come in and burn, and the aspen would resprout. The pine trees would follow them, and then it would catch again in a 50 or 100-year cycle. We've put a stop to that regular disturbance regime, which has been problematic. Smokey the Bear was a great campaign from a effectiveness standpoint, but it was disastrous from the standpoint of keeping healthy forests around this country. And so we need disturbance, especially in aspen conifer systems. 106 is a mechanical way to do that, which provides some advantages in terms of being able to control what you do and not have the risk of an escaped fire. And it does look like vegetation respond favorably. And in terms of these mule deer voting with their feet where they go, they're picking to use 106, and the results are fat deer, big fawns.
Has your tracking noticed that it actually is drawing more deer to that area?
I mean, they definitely are voting with their feet, and if you look at their use within their home range, there are definitely increased use patterns associated with the treatments.
Wow, that is significant.
Yeah.
What's next on your deck? And you mentioned that you were going to try and launch a new study that was going to look at what's going through their tummies or something like that.
We're a year and a half in. We've got another year or two of monitoring animals, catching fawns in June, weighing them, seeing how well they survive. Definitely still preliminary, and so we need to follow that out for the next couple years. There is a big emphasis as well on understanding the piece you talked about, which is the fire piece. And what are the differences? Or do they respond the exact same way from burned treatments or burns that are wildfires as they are on the 106 mechanical treatments? That's an open question that ought to be investigated over the next few years. Everything does tie back to nutrition, so there's nutrition influences everything. How well they survive, how healthy they are, so keeping connected to nutrition is going to be key. Working with partners, land management agencies to try and, when there is a nutritional limitation or evidence that there's a summer range habitat quality problem, what can we do to fix it, and how do the animals respond? And so there is additional pieces of information that we are working towards understanding in collaboration with the state of Utah.
How long do you think it'll take with all of this research to really get a handle on the 35 units and what's best for the wildlife population?
Yeah, I think we've learned so much in the last decade, even things that are different than we would have expected. We've been surprised on a few things. We have a relatively good understanding. Part of that understanding, and one thing that makes it a little bit challenging from a management standpoint, is you can have two adjacent herd units right next to each other that are influenced by very different things. One might have a habitat problem, and one might be predation. Fat deer that are suffering from a lot of predation pressure, or skinny deer suggesting lack of quality in the habitat. And those can change over time too. So what I think the state's gearing up for is just the sense that this is going to be long-term monitoring that we're going to do. It's going to factor into our mule deer management plan, and we're going to take these data and these information, and we're going to use it to set permits. We're going to use it to manage landscapes. We're going to work with our federal partners that own a lot of the land, or private landowners as well, and identify what the limiting factor might be, and then go and try and fix it. And then there'll be some other limiting factor. And so we're set up to where it can be kind of an adaptive management, continuous monitoring type program.
So with the results on 9 Mile Range Creek, and the fact that they were kind of surprising to people as to how good they were, what would happen to the deer populations if that kind of management technique spread across the whole state?
Yeah,
Would they overpopulate? Would they be moving into our neighborhoods, or?
Yeah, well, we can always sort of manage them with hunting, right, and permits. Yeah. The goal, we want more mule deer in the state of Utah, right? Our management, our population is not where we want it to be. We want to grow mule deer, and from the last decade or so of research, including this 9 Mile, the suggestion is one of our better ways to do that is going to be to improve the quality and availability of forage at higher elevations where they're summering. And so we're rolling that out. You're starting to see projects with this paradigm shift. It takes time, it's not easy, and it takes money, but you're seeing that roll out as one thing that will help this species over the next decade or two.
Is there a bureaucratic resistance that you seem to encounter at all?
We work with wonderful partners. The data sort of speak for themselves, and we all have our preconceived ideas and notions and our biases. But when you see data, and data are available for people to, chew on, look at, and work through their minds, those kind of fade away. And so I wouldn't say we see bureaucratic resistance per se, other than something new. Obviously, it takes time to get that sort of worked into the lexicon and the thought processes. But it's a big, aggressive monitoring effort with really high quality data, and the data speak for themselves.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I think that really helps us understand this issue. Thank you for watching, and be sure to share this with your friends if it's of interest to you. And we will have another topic next time we get together on the county seat. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. I appreciate it.